So if all you need to do is to become confident doing something and to get those things that you want to be able to do on your inner child's list of cans, well, if that's all there is to it, then what's standing in the way? Why therefore would it be so difficult? And here's the easiest explanation, okay? So have you ever been doing something or saying something or even just thinking something when suddenly you realize that what you're doing, saying or thinking is really just replaying the voice of your father or your mother or both? Or it might not be your mum or your dad, or it might be somebody else like a teacher or an employer or somebody in some kind of position of authority, someone that you at an earlier stage of life you've been looking up to. And it's like their voice has almost been stuck in your head and now you're replaying or repeating that same voice. For example, have you ever been trying to do something, you've been really struggling or feeling very vulnerable with something, and someone that you've looked up to has given you some kind of criticism? And so then that criticism, it's like it's become soaked up or absorbed by that inner voice, and it keeps playing and stopping you from being able to become confident and good at that thing. Or likewise, perhaps you've been out of your comfort zone, you've been really struggling or vulnerable with something, and somebody that you look up to has given you some praise. And it may have been only a very simple sentence or two, but that praise has really stuck with you, and it's almost like it's become this inner voice of permission that's also stuck with you and enabled you to keep going and continue to gain confidence in that thing. The other major part of the unconscious that Freud identified was what he called the superego. Now, the superego is kind of like this part of our mind that from a young age has been looking up to people, particularly our parents and teachers and people that play a dominant social voice, people that we look up to, or people that have some kind of position of power over us. And so what the superego does is it looks to all these voices and it kind of soaks up or absorbs the unspoken rules about how we're supposed to be. Okay, so what you could do, you could call that part of the mind the inner parent. So the way that the inner parent works is it looks to the outside world to figure out how we're supposed to be, okay? And likewise, it has a list, only its list of rules. Not just the rules about the way that you're supposed to do things, but specifically the rules of your identity. In other words, the rules about how you're supposed to be. And so I think the easiest way to think of how your unconscious mind works is it's like this constant ongoing dynamic between this inner child and an inner parent. And the relationship that they have back and forth, it's constantly going on in the background, okay? We're usually not even aware that it's happening. But that relationship between your inner child and inner parent, the part of you that determines what you can or can't do, and the part of you that determines what you should or should not be allowed to do, is having this ongoing, constant kind of conversation back and forth all the time. And that's basically the easiest way to think of what your unconscious mind is doing. So when the inner parent says, look, you must do these certain things or you must be this particular way, but the inner child says, but I can't do those certain things, or more importantly, I can't be that particular way, that's when we have inner conflict. That's when we have stress, basically. That explains that resistance or the magnetic repulsion that you feel when you're trying to force yourself to do something that on the inside it's just not letting you do. Okay, so when you want to be able to make a change, not only do you need the inner child part of you to say, yes, I can do that, but more importantly, you need that inner parent's permission to say, yes, you are allowed to do that. So, you might say, look, I want to be able to be healthier, I want to lose weight, I want to get fit, I want to have better relationships with people, I want to be more productive, have a better career or business. At the end of the day, unless those two parts of the unconscious mind are giving you both the confidence to do it and the permission to do it, you're just going to keep getting met with that resistance. And the way that the unconscious mind works is the only way to relieve that tension that happens between the two is basically to give up or to avoid it, or to, consciously we come up with some sort of excuse, but at the end of the day, what we do is we avoid it. We avoid it because it's too hard or it causes too much inattention. And so what we do is we just fall back into our old familiar patterns, our old familiar habits, where our inner child says, yes, I can do that. The inner parent says, yes, you're allowed to do that. Okay, that's what keeps us stuck. We might feel that we can do those things and we are allowed to do those things, but those things may not be helpful to us. Those things may not be the things which consciously we want to be able to do. So if we want to be able to do the things that we consciously know we should be doing, the things that are good for us, we need to get our inner child and our inner parent on board. Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting met with that internal resistance. To help make it easier to make sense of this, let me give you some classic examples of the kind of conversational dynamics that are often going on between the inner child and inner parent of a lot of people's minds. So for example, the inner parent's rules might say, you have to be absolutely perfect with this. And the inner child might say, but I can't be perfect with that right now. So the inner parent responds back with, well, in that case, you're not allowed to have any hope for the future. You have to feel worried or stressed out. The inner parent's rules might say, you have to feel certain about what's going to happen in order to feel safe. But the inner child says, but I don't know for certain what's going to happen right now. So the inner parent says, well, in that case, you're not allowed to feel safe. You have to feel anxious or worried. The inner parent might say, you need to get approval and respect and attention from people around you. Otherwise, you're not allowed to feel loved. And the inner child might respond back with, but I can't get those things from people right now. And so the inner parent says, well, in that case, you're not allowed to feel loved. You have to feel worthless. The inner parent's rules might say, you have to appear this certain way in order to feel good enough. And the inner child might respond back with, but I can't appear that certain way right now. So the inner parent says, well, in that case, you're not allowed to feel good enough. You have to feel worthless. The inner parent's rules might say, you need to get these certain outcomes or you need to achieve these certain results in order to feel confident. But the inner child might say, but I'm new to this. I'm not good enough. I'm not getting those outcomes right now. In which case the inner parent turns around and says, well, in that case, you're not allowed to feel confident. You have to have self-doubt instead. Here's the big one. The inner parent might say, you're not allowed to feel sad. You're not allowed to feel scared. You're not allowed to feel vulnerable. You can't handle that. And the inner child says, but that's how I feel when I do these things. And so the inner parent responds back with, well, in that case, you're not allowed to do those things. You have to avoid those things. The problem is that there's too many people in positions of power and authority and influence who have got it wrong when it comes to understanding how to get people to change and how to motivate people. Too many teachers think that their job is to just teach the lesson, give the know-how, and most students will get it, but the ones who didn't get it were just not smart enough. And that's not true at all. Too many employers will set expectations for their staff, and the staff who don't live up to those expectations, the employer will just assume that, they're just not competent enough. And that's not true at all. Likewise, many coaches will set certain goals for their team players, and they just assume that the people that don't live up or achieve those goals, they're just not motivated enough. And so I think too many people in these positions fundamentally just don't understand how it works. Let me tell you, as an exception to all those rules, based on my own personal experience, which I'll tell you about in the next lessons, I believe with 100% certainty that any individual can learn to become competent and confident in being able to do anything at all, so long as those factors are taken into consideration. So long as the goal is not just to give them the know-how and maybe a little bit of motivation and energy, but most specifically, the goal needs to be to create an identity change, specifically at the unconscious level. If that is achieved, then any person can do anything, no matter what the hurdles, no matter what the circumstances. The problem is that way too many people simply don't understand how it works, and so they make those inaccurate assumptions, which holds a lot of people back and robs them of the opportunity to make the change that they really want to make. So this is starting to make a little bit more sense now, and most importantly, if this is sounding like the kind of thing that you'd not only like to learn the theory of, but you'd like to be able to learn how to actually implement and put it into action, then follow me through the next few lessons, because I'm going to show you some really simple and easy to understand strategies and formulas and techniques, so that way you can not only start to make the changes that you've been looking for, but most importantly, you can learn how to make the changes to your own identity, so that way you can become the person who does those things automatically without having to face that magnetic resistance, but instead reprogram yourself so that unconsciously you're magnetically drawn towards those things. So it's no longer a challenge. So you no longer have to struggle or rely on motivation or willpower, but instead get to the point where you simply couldn't see yourself any other way. That's the aim, and they are the strategies and goals I'm going to share with you in the following lessons. Talk to you soon.
The people we look up to tend to shape our inner parental voice, which determines the rules about how we allow ourselves to be. The easiest way to think of the unconscious mind, therefore, is like an ongoing conversation between our inner child and inner parent. Our inner child would be unable to build confidence and change its identity until our inner parent gives it permission to do so. When the two voices conflict, it creates internal resistance, which makes us feel avoidant. We eventually give up and go back to our old familiar patterns so that we can relieve the tension. Giving ourselves permission can be difficult because too many people who shape our inner parental voice affect it in a way that keeps us stuck, rather than giving us the permission we need to change our identity. So in the next lessons, Stuart is going to show you some specific mind hacks to teach you how to communicate with yourself differently, to reprogram the way your inner parent gives your inner child the permission it needs to make the change you've come here looking for.